Are you a healthcare professional from a non-English speaking background who wants to become more culturally competent, sensitive, and equipped in order to work with patients from all cultural and linguistically diverse backgrounds? Are you a healthcare professional who would like to learn more about what cultural and linguistic diversity, competence, and sensitivity is? Stay tuned for the rest of this video. What is up, everyone? This is Shweta, the founder of Healthy Dynamics. We are a coaching practice that helps healthcare professionals from non-English speaking backgrounds become more confident, authentic, and competent communicators of the English language in order to build better relationships with their patients and colleagues and stand out in the workplace as a person of excellence. So apologies for not posting a video last week. There were some technical problems that made their way, as it usually happens, and there was no sound in the video that I had recorded, so here is part 2 of it. As you can see behind me, I'm just shooting right in a primary school today, and I'm very delighted to see that the spring is finally here. So you're going to be seeing me in very different outfits from here onwards. So I'm not going to be wearing all my jumpers and jackets that I was doing in the last few videos. Now it's going to be more loose and relaxed clothing that's more appropriate to the weather. Now spring is by far my favorite season because it really represents a new awakening, a new rebirth, almost like someone is making a new beginning, because spring is really closely interconnected and related with decluttering, getting rid of the things that are weighing you down, bringing you down, and not really serving you, and making room for the ones that are better for you. And whilst this is specifically focused on physical objects, it can well be applied to other areas of your life. So always I've associated spring with not only the lovely, pleasant weather as well as the blooming flowers and nature everywhere, but also the rebirth, almost like a reawakening of like a new lease on life. So that's why it is my favorite season. Anyway, back to this video. So this is an offshoot, the part 2 of last week's video, where we talked about etiquette in the professional context. So how professionally in the healthcare space can we practice more etiquette principles and policies in order to be better at our job. This time we're going to be switching gears a little bit and talking more about the cultural aspect of it. So what does cultural etiquette actually mean, and how that can be applied in the space of healthcare when we're working with our patients, and how we can be more culturally sensitive, competent, also be quite aware and well equipped in order to best serve our patients. Now, the definition of etiquette that I did in the last video has not changed. It's still the same, however, now it's in the context of culture. So culture, again, is closely intertwined with values, beliefs, practices, rituals that are specific to a group of people that could be defined by an ethnicity, by a gender, by a race, by a religion, or even a country that they live in. So that's what the focus of this video is going to be about. Now, it is no surprise that we live in a world at the moment that is very culturally and linguistically diverse. Gone are the days when you had patients who looked exactly like you in terms of their skin color and their appearance, or their religious practices, or their belief systems, their values, their customs, as well as their sexuality. So everything used to be quite homogeneous back in the day. Now everything is completely different. We have a melting pot of a world now where we have people from all corners of the world living and working in different parts of the world. So unsurprisingly, as healthcare professionals, you are going to be dealing with patients who come from a variety of cultural, religious, racial, and linguistic backgrounds. So what are some things that you can do as a healthcare professional in order to better understand what the culture of all your patients represent, and how you can, in that process, build a better relationship with them, communicate better with them, and obviously treat them in the best way possible. So let's start with the first point, that a strategy that I would recommend. Number 1, I would say, is that learn elements of the main language that is spoken in the cohort of patients that you work with. Now, I am aware that this is not always easy, because learning a language takes a lot of time, practice, and a process of mastery. And sometimes you can be in a place where there is more than one predominant language. So you can be in a place where they speak more than one language, and they can have it in your second languages. So whilst this is not always easy, what we can always do is get a baseline understanding of the main customs, traditions, religious beliefs, and these aspects of the cohort of patients that you work with, and how that can be giving you a foundation of how you can best understand sometimes why your patients are the way they are, why they're making certain choices, why they do things as a ritual or a practice or like a routine. So for instance, if you are working in a place where there is a major population of Jewish people or Muslim people, you have to be aware that they have certain times of the year that are quite religiously important to them, such as Ramadan or Eid or Purim or Hanukkah, and also be aware of sometimes their diets, that, you know, whether it's halal or kosher or anything like that. And at the same time also, sometimes in those religions and cultures there can be quite some restrictions and limits on the sort of people that they would like to work with, a person that they want to be consulted by. Now, this is not by any means a racist concept. It's more to make the patient feel comfortable and assured. So they might have that preference, and we as healthcare professionals have to really take that into consideration. So again, having a baseline understanding of the customs, traditions, beliefs, and the rituals and routines of your majority cohort of your patient that you work with can really go a long way. So that's number one. Number two would really be the salutations that you need to be aware of. So salutations really represents how you address somebody. So where I come from, India, where I grew up a third of my life, it is not uncommon. So even if, say, your patient happens to be a doctor, it's not uncommon to actually call them by doctor, whatever, or you can call them by as sir or madam or ma'am, and that can happen as well when you're actually a technician of some sort. And it's quite common in those cultures to actually address somebody in a particular language, the equivalent of sir or madam. Or like I got talking to a patient, even though I live in Australia, I got talking to a patient who was from Georgia in the USA quite recently, and he had that very strong southern accent, which I absolutely love. But at the same time, during our conversation, he was calling me ma'am all the time, even though he's like at least 30 years older than me. So and he told me that's just what they do. So they just address everyone in a respectful manner, regardless of what your age is. So he kept saying, yes ma'am, no ma'am. And where I come from in Australia, we don't do that at all. We don't call anyone by sir, ma'am, or doctor. You just call them by their first names. Even like when I'm talking to a doctor in my job, I do the same thing. I just call them by their first name because that's how it is over here. But I am aware that in different parts of the world is not going to be the same. So having that understanding of what the main salutation is, or how it's different across people of different social and professional hierarchies, can be quite significant, and it can actually help you go a long way in learning, again, these little cultural nuances that can help you build a better relationship with your patients and build a better equation with them. That was number two. Number three is having an understanding of hand gestures. So depending on what the context is, sometimes you can have a situation where you as a healthcare professional may have to shake your patient's hand. Now, again, depending on how comfortable they are or not, you may choose or not to, or to do that. But that can be a much more neutral way. So shaking hands is quite common ground, and depending on where you live, that might be you have to do that, and in some places it's best to avoid that, and sometimes it's you take it or leave it the way that you deem appropriate. Whereas in some parts of the world, you might have to be expected to fold your hands when you're actually greeting somebody. So that obviously doesn't happen in this side of the world, but it's quite common that you might get patients who see doctors in a much higher light, or see healthcare professionals they put them on a pedestal, so they might do this. So that's not something to be offended by. Just be aware that that's how it works in their culture. So that again can go a long way in when you greet somebody, and it helps you understand, okay, this is why they're doing it. They're showing that little bit of respect. It's not really to offend you in any way. The next point is to keep communication with your patients and colleagues more formal, just to be on the safe side. Now, where I live in Australia, it's very common, depending again on the nature of where you work, it's quite common to refer to each other by slangs and words such as mate, buddy, pal, slangs that are quite common, not just in Australia, but also in certain parts of the world. However, this can become coming across as quite offensive when you apply it to another country or to another culture. So I'll give you an example. So when I first moved here and I did my schooling here, I remember speaking to one of my teachers, and I was just asking her some questions about some homework that I had, and and I asked her which option I should choose in this particular homework task, and she just said to me, "I don't care."
I don't care. I love it. I don't care.
And I personally felt quite offended by that, and the reason for that being because I've always known as "I don't care" as being quite offensive. That's almost like you really don't give a shit. But I learned with time that that's not really true. "I don't care" in the Australian context means it doesn't really bother me. It's up to you. You choose what you want to do. So in a situation like that, when a patient is asking you a question about whether I should do this or do that, instead of saying "I don't care," which can be perceived as quite offensive, you can use an alternative such as "it doesn't really matter" or "it doesn't really worry or bother me." That's much more neutral, and it's much less offensive, let's just say. So again, and also keep communication more formal, as I mentioned previously. You don't have to use "sir," "madam," and all those things, but also avoid any slangs and all that as well. We're halfway through the video, so if you like what you're watching so far and would like more guidance and strategies on how you can communicate effectively as a healthcare professional from a non-English speaking country, make sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell to make sure that you are notified every time a new video is being uploaded. So take some time out of your video viewing and make sure that you do that. Moving on. The next point that I would address is showing cultural sensitivity. Now, this probably requires a whole new video in and of itself, and I probably will do that at some point. But cultural sensitivity is quite closely tied with cultural awareness. So again, having an understanding of when a patient does not want to open up to you, or they will open up only to a healthcare professional of a particular gender or of a particular age or of a particular race, you have to be a little bit sensitive and respectful of that. So again, having that understanding and incorporating that, and also if they're not really asking you too many questions, if they're not opening up as much, if they're being a little bit more passive, or even the other way around for that matter, just be aware that this is because that's how they have been brought up in their culture. That's all they have known. That just becomes like their operating system. So having that sensitivity and awareness can really go a long way as well in interacting with your patients. So again, the concept of cultural sensitivity is quite subtle, and it's quite evolving, ever evolving in the day and age that we live in. And the nuances can be very, there's no black and white, there's a lot of shades of gray. And I might do a video on cultural sensitivity in the future, so stay tuned for that. The next one I would say is take into account if the patient wants to be examined by a specific person. So it can be a specific person who they had a good experience with in the past, or they can be of a specific gender. Like in my job in radiology, I often get patients who want to do pregnancy scans or pelvic scans. They want to be observed and examined by a female sonographer, and that's absolutely fine. I sometimes even ask them, are you comfortable with a female sonographer or a male sonographer? For certain scans, not all of them, but these are the ones that I have commonly noticed, and not everyone says that, some of them do. So always take into consideration of that. And similarly, if they want to have a doctor of their cultural background, or a healthcare professional that they want to work with, because of whatever reason, they might have, they feel that a person of one particular nationality, race, or religion can understand them better. So definitely have to take that into consideration, or take that into account. And also things like sexuality. So if your patient is in the LGBTQ community, they might feel more safe and assured and can open up better to some healthcare professional of a similar background. So that again is something to take into consideration and account. The next one is a bit of a tricky one. When a patient's cultural and religious beliefs clashes with medical protocol and treatments that you recommend that will keep them safe and healthy, it does put you in a bit of a ethical and moral dilemma. But it's important at that point is to not sort of judge them or show any kind of bias or guilt them into doing what you tell them to do just because they are, you think that you are a healthcare professional and you think that you know better. That may not be the case. But if in that situation when a patient is saying that I'm not comfortable doing this because of I've been brought up in this type of a culture, this type of a religion where we frown upon those things, for example. Now, I'm aware, I did recently come across a story where a patient who was from a Jehovah's Witness background, and this particular patient was in quite a critical condition, and they had to be given blood transfusion or an organ transplant or one of those things. And the patient outrightly refused. She said that I don't care what happens to me, I'm not getting the blood transfusion or the organ transplant because it's against my religious beliefs. Now in a situation like that, I can understand that you may have this dilemma that you do want to help them and you don't want them to suffer anymore. But at the same time, you cannot also offend them by going against the religion and the culture and the beliefs that they are really big on. So in a situation like this, you have to be quite factual and inform them of all the consequences of their choice. So obviously if you choose not to go down that route, you tell them that this is the likely chance of this happening, or you offer them alternatives that might be more in line or more aligned with what might work for them and also doesn't offend their cultural or religious beliefs in any way. So that could be this is a tricky one, but that could be a good one, again, a good strategy to incorporate in the future. The next one I would say is immerse yourself in training that's given to you in the workplace or even online for that matter, in training related to cultural and linguistic diversity. Interact with people who you work with who come from all cultural, religious and linguistic backgrounds and get a better understanding of the things that they do as part of their culture, how they live, how they function, how they operate. And that way, when you have all those strategies and that bit of knowledge in your tool belt, you can understand when you're actually working with a patient of that background, why they are the way they are. So that could be a good way of doing it. And a lot of workplaces nowadays, there's a big focus on diversity. Now, the word diversity can be anything, but for the purposes of this video, we're just going to focus specifically on cultural and linguistic diversity. So a lot of workplaces offer training on how staff can become more culturally sensitive and competent, and just have a better understanding overall of different cultures and how that shapes the different people that they work with. So if your workplace is offering that, please jump on board and really attend those trainings and play really full out and participate actively. And it just gives you that extra knowledge, that extra bit of strategies, and equips you better in order to know that, okay, if I have a patient who's of this particular background, who's a little bit different from the ones that I have consulted with in the past, I know what to do now. So that's another one. The final one I would say is avoid personal questions that are not really relevant to the treatment or why they've come to you for. So I have mentioned this in one of my past videos, that when a patient comes to a healthcare professional because they want to get sterilized for whatever reason, they don't want to have children or they don't want to have any more children, it is important that you work with the patient instead of sort of injecting your biases and your judgments and your opinions on that. So, and also asking questions, and this is quite common. In those situations, healthcare professionals will very commonly ask, what does your partner think? What does your family think? That's not really important, that's not really relevant. You have to account for what the patient is telling you and what they want your help and support with, and work with them. Obviously, you have to follow the necessary steps and procedures to make sure that they're in a healthy space in order before you can approve them for that particular procedure. But it is important that you don't ask them questions that are out of context. Similarly, if you are working with someone in mental health, it's important that you ask questions that are not going to be very triggering for them, and ask them in the very beginning or give them a heads up in the beginning that what I'm going to say at this point might be a little bit triggering for you, and if so, if you're uncomfortable, please let me know and I'll do something different. So these sort of things definitely are the things that will give them much more confidence, your patients I mean, and they will be assured of the fact that, okay, they understand, they are sensitive, they are respectful, they are not just treating me as a number in the system, they are treating me as an individual and a human. So these are just some of the tips that I feel that we can all incorporate in order to show better cultural understanding, as well as be culturally sensitive and competent when working with our patients. If you like this video, make sure that you hit the subscribe button and notification bell to be up to date with when we have videos in the future, which is usually every week or at least every fortnight. And if you have any thoughts on what I have covered in this video so far, please make sure that you leave them in the comment section below. And thank you very much for your attention and your viewership and your love and support so far. Stay tuned for next week's video. There will definitely be one next week. Happy spring for the ones who live in Australia, and spring has sprung. And as always, have a good weekend, and I will chat to you guys next week. Thank you so much.